Welcome back, everybody. It's 2-0. We're in the 20s now, 20 exact.
So old.
No, it's younger than me and you. We're not old. The podcast is younger than we are in episodes compared to years.
Sure.
Sure.
Something like that.
Summer Showdown has finished. Ta-da! We are now completely finished with all the actual tournaments because Countdown Cup doesn't really count because it's a play-in tournament, not a normal tournament. So the best teams are no longer going to be playing in tournaments to playoffs. It's only the
best teams already weren't playing in tournaments.
I mean, I guess
at the Gladiators.
At the Gladiators. Man, Reiner went off a little bit. I couldn't tell if he was baiting or not, and then he deleted the tweet, and I think he deactivated his Twitter again. That man again. Welcome the classic Reiner move. But yeah, Summer Showdown finished. It was fun to watch again. A LAN event, another one. This time, first one in Canada. Custa doused himself in maple syrup. And it was good to have Puckett back on the broadcast. I really enjoyed having Puckett back on the desk. He brings some professionalism that doesn't exist otherwise.
Yeah, like I mean, I didn't watch Early Owl, like not nearly as much.
You don't really know the Puckett days.
But that being said, like it was good to have some new energy on the desk, like just like with Overly, except he actually knows Overwatch somewhat. So that was pretty cool to see.
It was a fun tournament, though, even though everyone played literally the same thing. And I think I remembered reading from, I don't know if it was from the stats guy on Twitter, but there were 0 substitutions. 0 player substitutions in the entire tournament.
Yeah, sounds about right.
I mean, like, we didn't see, like, Doha. There was nothing. But, whatever. So what we're going to do is the same that we've done with all of the tournaments. Just go through, talk about the teams in the order of elimination, not just like games, because that'd be a lot of games to talk about. So we've broken up the teams like usual based on breakdown. And we have combined the regions here just because, APAC only had 4 teams. So we just kind of chalked them in. So to start, there were 3 teams that just kind of came and went. Titans, Justice Charge showed up, played 2 games, and then left. Which one do you want to start with? Which one of these 3 do you want to start with?
Let's just start at the first one you mentioned, Titans. They took a map from the Shock, and I think that was kind of a big tournament highlight for them, and kind of the only one. They didn't do much, but they weren't really expected to do much. Like, the fact they made the tournament was awesome, and
they didn't perform poorly by any means. I mean, they were playing against literally the 7 other best teams in North America. So they just kind of came, they collected their league point and just enjoyed being there. And that being said, even with their league point, I believe they're still 2 or 3 points behind Boston though. So they'll need to do good in this Countdown Cup qualifiers to get that play-in spot, because they're literally just competing with Boston, because since they made it and like New York didn't make it and Boston didn't make it either, I'm pretty sure Vancouver is the only one that is really contesting Boston. I don't think New York is really, because New York only has like 2 points, 3 points, whereas Titans I think have 4. So
who do they play in this next little bit?
I'd have to look, and we'll look at that next week as well, especially since there's no matches.
That's true.
But I mean, the King performed very well. I would say that in terms of their 2 games, King probably stood out the most in terms of the team overall. I didn't feel like Aspire did as much as he normally did, but then again, I mean, he looked the best when they were playing like the worst team. So I mean, him not popping quite off as much when they're playing the San Francisco Shock. And I mean, taking a map off the Shock is nothing to slap. I mean,
I don't have a great feeling about this next little thing. I pulled up their matches.
What do we got?
London, Gladiators, Dallas, Toronto, and Florida.
Oh,
so they
losable.
They might beat Florida.
Hopium.
But,
I mean, they just have to hope Boston flames out, and they just have to get. I mean, it's not looking good for the Titans moving forward, but I think they can walk out of this tournament feeling good about themselves. Like they performed.
They did better than they were expected to do this year.
Exactly. So I think they did well, but nobody expected a whole lot out of them, to be completely fair. However, the other NA team that went 2-0, the Justice, we were one map away from the Justice literally making this tournament go a completely different route.
Yeah.
If Justice 3-0'd the Fuel day one, suddenly Spitfire playing Justice and probably beat Justice, and Spitfire probably would have been in the winners finals.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is Washington took more maps off Dallas than anyone else.
Did.
And honestly, like, is that true for the entire stage? Like, Dallas didn't go to 5 on any, did they?
I'm trying to think. No, because Glads took 2 maps off them because they went to 5.
Okay. But that's good company to
yeah,
be keeping,
Justice took more maps off of Fuel than they took as many maps off Fuel as Shock did in 3 attempts.
Yeah.
And it really came down to the fact that this first game that Fuel played, Washington was really good at exploiting the Ashe comp, and we saw that a lot in this tournament of how Ashe was getting exploited by the Sojourn comps, because when you're playing the Ashe, you can't play aggressive because that's just not how Ashe works. So you're kind of like forced to play reactionary, and so Justice just kind of ran it down mid, but then Fuel went, oh wait, this isn't working, put Edison on Sojourn, and then the last 3 maps weren't even close.
Yeah.
But we could have had a very different tournament. Had Fuel gone into the losers bracket day one, the losers bracket would have just been a bloodbath. Fuel would have just killed everybody. Nobody would have had any hope of going anywhere, and we would have.
Well, and I think the finals still would have been.
The finals would have been the same. It's just teams like Mayhem and Defiant wouldn't have gotten as far because Fuel would have just kicked them out.
Yeah.
And it's like what we would have had is Spitfire in the finals, who would have just gotten rolled by Shock anyways. And it's like we would have had the same finals, but Justice. It's weird because Justice goes to 5 against Fuel, but then they play Defiant, and then they didn't do as well. And I think a lot of that had to do with Decay. Decay was really popping off when Fuel was only playing the Ashe comps, but it was weird because Defiant did that a lot as well. So Justice just didn't play quite the same. They kind of just got reverse swept by Fuel, and then maybe just got boomed a little bit. And it happens. Justice are in an okay spot, I think, for plans. I think they're the number 9. I think they're the 9th seed above Boston and below Florida. And I don't really think they have anything to worry about. As long as they don't just like throw it down the toilet, they're basically guaranteed a play-in spot. So,
yeah, I think they're definitely in a good spot. And I mean, they've had consistency issues the entire season, but when they decide to show up and play, like, they can play against anyone. And I think that's what we saw this tournament in that first match is when the Justice decide to show up, they can take maps from the Fuel and potentially take matches in the future. So I think if you're looking for some crazy stuff to happen during the playoffs, I think the Justice are one of those teams to keep an eye on as being able to potentially, pull a run for the title or do some crazy upset.
Pull some upsets and shifting things around.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was those two, and I mean they're two different. I mean, Justice almost were able to move on and then just kind of fell out, but Titans, they got them getting there was a big deal. Over on the APAC side of things, there was also a team that was just happy to be there. Guangzhou Charge kind of got rolled, but
no big surprise there.
No,
like, I mean, we'd talked about it, like, with the other 3 teams being who they are. Like, I think Guangzhou was the only team that we really thought didn't stand a chance of winning this thing.
Yeah, but them making the tournament puts them in a. I mean, unless Valiant like really wake up in the Countdown Cup and Guangzhou just flounders, the Charge should have their play-in spot pretty much locked in because it takes 3 of the remaining 4 teams for play-ins. So them making the tournament, giving them an extra league point over the Valiant, I think puts them several, because they went 4-2 and Valiant only won a single game. So they don't really have anything to worry about. APAC is pretty much, we know which teams are going to be probably in the play-ins at the very least. Seeding is the only thing that'll change. But Charge, yeah, we didn't really expect a whole lot out of them. I mean, I thought they could have probably done a little bit better considering that they literally beat everybody but Seoul and Shanghai in the qualifiers. But to be fair, those weren't the same team. You know, the Fusion team that they lost here wasn't the same one that they beat in the qualifiers. So I thought I wanted to see more from Jimmy. Jimmy didn't really do a whole lot. Custa hypes him up the wazoo, but, you know, it's the Guangzhou Charge. At the end of the day, it's still the Charge.
Yeah, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think this came as a big surprise to anyone.
These three teams being the first three out, I don't think are too surprising. On the APAC side of things, Charge was definitely the one that I would have picked to go out first. And then I would have picked Titans to go out first. I didn't think that Justice were going to get rolled out based on the round one performances. I would have definitely picked probably the Defiant to have been the one to go out after how Justice performed. But them going out, I didn't think they were going to make it far in the bracket regardless. So these being the first three out, it's not a terribly large surprise. But then we move on to our teams. So the Outlaws, I don't know why we thought anything was going to happen. And then Spitfire had a little case of deja vu.
Well, I thought it was really funny because, so the way this went down, you had September 8th, you had London beating Toronto. And that same day you had Houston beating Florida. Both games were pretty one-sided. London and Houston just dominated,
rolled
which
them.
we kind of expected. Then both teams get knocked down to the lower bracket on September 9th.
By fuel and
September
shock,
10th,
they lose to each other's opponents.
Both teams lose to each other's opponents that they beat pretty handily the first day. And so it's like man, it was so sad. And when Toronto beat Houston, internally I was like, yes,
here it is.
Hiccup's team's out,
chance.
My team's in. And then London goes 2-0 against Florida, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is easy.
And then a case of deja vu comes around.
And I was like, well, and even I was like, when London beats Florida, and it was when London beat Florida, I was like,
they beat
then
Defiant,
it's just them against Toronto,
who they've beaten twice now in the last week.
And then they go against the Shock, and who knows? You know, it could be kind of crazy stuff.
But
instead, they lost. They got reverse swept. And that was tragic.
Our two teams. Literally, I mean, Spitfire actually just had a case of deja vu. It literally textbook how the midseason madness went. Knock down the losers, reverse swept by Mayhem. You're done. After the Mayhem lose 3-0 to the Outlaws. But then the Outlaws did what they did against the Spitfire earlier in the stage and just didn't show up. That Outlaws team that played that Defiant team was not the team that 3-0'd the Mayhem, and not even the team that played the Shock, because even though the Outlaws got 3-1 by the Shock, the one map they took, they played out of their minds on Hollywood. But they just looked...
It was tragic.
They looked
and it's
lost.
Like, yeah, it really is interesting because, like, the London match, you know, reverse sweeps happen.
Yeah, they happen.
You know? It happens. You get the momentum swing. It makes sense. But, like, Houston getting 3-0'd by Toronto, it shouldn't happen. But with Houston, like, this is the second time this tournament cycle.
Yeah, and like the first one against the Spitfire, you look at it and you're like, okay, maybe it was Piggy had just left. They were like not in a good mental spot. But this one makes no sense.
Yeah, and so I wonder if there is something when it comes to like maybe team relationships where, like, you know, a couple players really don't get along, or there's a discrepancy between the like coaching staff and the players or something. Like, I wonder if there's some like behind the scenes drama that kind of causes this to happen, because
now that Piggy's not around.
So that's kind of my guess is maybe the Houston San Francisco game kind of stirred up some crap, and that was what led to the Toronto match.
Yeah, because I mean I want to analyze it, but I'm like that they shouldn't be playing, because the problem that I was seeing with the Outlaws is they were just playing so scared. And it's like if they were playing Ash permanently, okay, fine. you can't really play super aggro with Ashe. But they weren't. They were putting Merritt on Sojourn. And I mean, Merritt and Pelican were like largely absent. And a lot of what Pelican was doing is he was like going so deep with like Blades trying to hero play it and like clutch it out when he didn't have to do that. So he would be out in no man's land, get picked, and then fight's done. And Dante was getting, it was very similar to how the Spitfire game went. And the Outlaws just kind of sat there and just died.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, they've now finished 6th, 8th, and 6th in the tournaments.
Yeah.
But
which is really tragic because like, and one of the big things about this team comp is you need to play aggressively. You know, like, you know, even with the Ashe, the rest of the team needs to push forward, needs to use their ults. Because like in other metas, like that's one thing that separates this current meta with a lot of, you know, previous metas is this one, you want to be the one to ult first a lot of the time. You want to push against, you know, push people all the way back to spawn and stuff and take these close fights and stuff. And they weren't really doing that.
No, they weren't. And it's like, this was supposed to be their tournament. Had they played the same level they did against Mayhem or Shock against the Defiant, I mean, Defiant were looking good, but I think Outlaws would have been able to beat them had they played at the level that we had seen them in the previous 2 matches. Because, like, with Glads and Rain out of this tournament, this should have been the Outlaws' chance to gun for second at the very least, because Shock weren't invincible.
Yeah. Well, and even when we finished watching the first day, I think you even messaged me, and you didn't exactly say it, but you know, it felt like you were kind of insinuating that this is like Houston.
This is
win this. This is Houston's to lose. Like Dallas looked very vulnerable that first match.
And Shock lost a map to Titans.
Lost a map to the Titans, and so it's like, and then Houston comes in 3-0 Florida, so it's like
they looked the best on day one out of the teams.
Good.
And it's just, it was a completely different Outlaws team that played. And I'm hoping that going into Countdown Cup, they just move on, because they're sitting comfortably in the standings. They literally have a 3-point buffer above and below them, because they're sitting at 16 points. Gladiators in third are at 19, and Spitfire below them are at 13. So as long as the Outlaws don't like just whiff horribly, which this season, in the regular season, they haven't. Even this past stage, when it looked like they were whiffing, they still went 4-2. Yeah. So like they're in good spot for guaranteed playoffs, but they don't perform in tournaments, and that's especially this tournament when Rain and Glads, the 2 biggest challengers to them, were absent, and they just proceeded to fall over. Spitfire just got unlucky. Someone just kind of went, "No, I win now." Bye. Unlucky, but Outlaws, I don't know why. It hurts. 5 years of this, please stop. But the next group of teams, the 3 teams that I think largely, the Mayhem, Defiant, and Fusion, I think they can walk out of this tournament for the most part satisfied with their performance. Maybe Fusion a little disappointed, but I mean, after how the stage started for them, the fact they even made the tournament at all is kind of crazy. I think the team that can be most happy with their performance, though, is the Mayhem.
Oh yeah, they shouldn't have made it as far as they did. The reverse sweep on London was, you know, wonderful by them. The fact that they 3-0'd a team that took a map from San Francisco Shock the day before, like I think everything outside of that first match against Houston, they can look at and just be like, yeah, we played out of our minds. Like, really good tournament for them. Way better than I'm pretty sure anyone thought they would do.
Yeah, no, I mean, they came in as the 8th seed, barely squeaking in and playing double flex. And then as they got further in the tournament, they played less and less of the double flex and just straight up took the mirror. And Hydron and Checkmate were doing some magic. And as soon as Majed was able to come and be with them in person after the Outlaws match, it was like,
it made a difference.
They just immediately leveled the Titans, and kept their mental game against the Spitfire, and almost beat the Defiant. Like, had somebody told me before the tournament that Mayhem Defiant was going to be the giga banger of the tournament, and the winner was going to go and face Shock in the losers finals, I would have been like, yeah, no, you're smoking something.
The fact that Florida, Toronto were 3rd and 4th, at the end of the tournament. Just
after both of them literally lost to Outlaws and Spitfire.
Yeah. They there was your lower bracket run.
Like this tournament literally gave us a circle of confusion because Outlaws 3-0 Mayhem, who 3-2 Spitfire, who 3-1 Defiant, who 3-0 the Outlaws. And you're like, what? Hang on a second. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's a mess. But and like for me it was a very bittersweet tournament because like I'm a huge London fan and although I give you crap and stuff like that, I like the Houston. I've kind of always been a fan of Dante and stuff. And so it's like when I see the teams that I generally cheer for get knocked out the way they did, it's kind of sad. But then to see Florida and Toronto do well and have like such awesome gameplay and having that match against each other, like it was kind of a redeeming fact. So it's like if you're going to take London and Houston out, at least do it that way.
At least do it that way. Because had Mayhem beaten the Spitfire or Defiant beating the Outlaws and then just got turbo stomped by the other one, I'd be like, really? We lost to this team?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm glad that they at least took it to each other. But I mean, at the end of the day, as we talked about before this tournament even got like underway, it was really just like, all right, who wants to lose to the two best teams in your region? Step right up, folks. Defiant played great. I do think a lot of it had to do with like the hometown buff. Like, oh my goodness, that crowd was loud.
Yeah.
I think it was louder than the Kickoff Clash crowd in Dallas. I mean,
which was great to see.
Those boos. Man.
Yeah, especially like after the start of the tournament being like second match of the tournament, London, or no, that was the second
one.
Match. Yeah, having that be the second match, like I'm sure being a local fan, like that kind of sucked. But then to have the comeback run and make it to the semifinals, like that's killer. Like they did great.
I think the biggest thing for me and the biggest thing that this meta that I walked away with from Defiant is like we already knew that Churong Twilight backline was crazy, but this meta especially like amped that up exponentially. Outside of like their Spitfire games, Churong Twilight just didn't die. Especially like in the Outlaws game, they were always just there peeling for each other, peeling for the rest of the team, and they were like single-handedly just helping win fights.
Yeah.
So Defiant showed why they came in. I mean, they really should have been the third seed coming in, but Spitfire's just their kryptonite, I guess, just as Mayhem is Spitfire's kryptonite. So, but they definitely played to their fourth seed, unlike the Outlaws not playing to their third seed standing. Unlucky. Moving back over to APAC, though, the Philadelphia Fusion. I mean, this team has taken the Seoul Dynasty to 5 now, 2 out of the last 3 times in the last week. I mean, Dynasty in their final match only lost a map to Fusion, but it's amazing what not playing Carpe does for this team.
Yeah, I think, the last like 2 weeks we've seen a different Fusion, and it's a good Fusion, and it's the type of Fusion that, when things come down to playoffs, who knows? Because like sure they aren't quite winning these Seoul games, but they're making it close. And you add in a little hype of it being the final tournament, and who knows, maybe that 2-3 becomes a 3-2 in favor of Philadelphia, like, so I think, this Fusion, if they look this good going into the finals, and if they're able to adjust to whatever the new meta becomes, like, and if they keep Carpe on the bench, then I think, they'll be like the Justice, another one of those teams to keep an eye out for, for maybe some upsets in the playoffs.
Yeah, and MN3 and Zest were obviously the biggest standouts in their games. I mean, they flattened the charge. It wasn't even close. But then, and they just barely lose to Seoul. And even the second time, they most of the maps were close outside of Circuit. Well, no, Circuit was close as well. It's like all their maps were close, even the ones they lost.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Fusion are just like a handful of things away from being able to get over Dynasty. Now, granted, depending on how the meta goes, then Dynasty may level up a little bit. But Fusion definitely can look at this tournament and be like, okay, we still have it. After their, I mean, it was horrible. The qualifier games were terrible. But at least they had like an easy fix. So like, okay, let's just play M3, and then literally it fixed itself overnight. So their problems for the most part are pretty easily solved. Just don't bench M3 and Zest. Easy wins. So I think those 3 teams can be happy with their performance at the tournament. But at the end of the day, all the other teams were just fighting for who wants to lose to the top 2 seeds in your region first.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly
they all lost to Shock and Dynasty, were the 2. I mean, Shock and Dynasty just pushed the other teams into the ground. And they played, I don't know. Let's start with Dynasty. I think Dynasty, the first matchup against the Dragons in the upper bracket was not pretty. I mean, they got flattened. It was a 3-0, just like it was the first time they played. But then in the finals, they played a little bit better. The team as a whole did did perform better. We finally didn't get a 4-0 stomping in a finals this season. In terms of the region separate, why can't I say the separation? There it is. But they still, I mean, they couldn't quite get it over. I mean, Dragons were just a better team.
Yeah, which I think now's an appropriate time to pause discussion to brag a little bit. So, you and I, remember last week when I was saying teams need to listen to us because we're just better and brilliant and amazing and smart? Okay, have you looked at our APAC predictions for this tournament? Okay, last week we predicted Guangzhou Charge would lose to Shanghai 3-1.
Wait a minute, did we get it perfect?
It was a 3-0. So we were 1 map off. We'll keep a running total. Next match we predicted it would be a 3-2, where Fusion would beat Seoul. So we mixed those 2 up. But then we predicted in the lower bracket, whoever lost that second game
would roll the charge.
Roll the charge, which happened. We predicted Dynasty would beat Seoul 3-1 in the losers round 2, which happened.
You mean, wait, did we have Fusion beating Dragons in the upper bracket?
No, we had Fusion getting rolled,
and then Dynasty rolling
Fusion. And then so we got the upper bracket once again mixed up which team made it. But then the losers round we had Seoul beating 3-1, and then we had the finals 4-2.
Right, because I was insisting. I was like, no, this has got to go 4-2, and you were like, it's just gonna be.
I was like, yeah, sure, it's gonna be.
So for the most part, even we got a bit mixed up.
1 game wrong,
and but we had
and it messed a couple things.
So we almost were perfect on our APAC preds.
And really, the final matches, like in total, we only got like maybe 3 maps wrong. Across the board, 3 or 4.
Look at us go. We're
kind of crazy.
We understand APAC. We're figuring it out.
We're amazing. APAC is predictable and consistent.
We're figuring it out.
Let's see what happens next.
Yeah. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, like when we were doing this, we were like, Shanghai and Seoul are just so much better than the rest of APAC.
Yeah.
But Seoul is not Shanghai, and we saw that in the final week of the qualifiers. Like Seoul is good. But I don't think there was anybody that genuinely thought Seoul was going to be able to win just by how the matchups went. I mean, when Seoul's going to 5 against Philly, Dragons aren't going to 5 against Philly. Yeah. Dragons are just curb stomping everybody.
And I do think that, part of that has to do with meta. This meta is very Shanghai favored, in terms of like who they have playing some of the key characters. Like they have the best Genji in the world, probably, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
In Who Are You? And like I just think this meta is kind of like handpicked for Shanghai. I think they can adapt to any meta, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But but this meta is kind of the Shanghai meta. And so we'll see how the Seoul Shanghai dynamic changes coming into the next tournament cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, at this point, I think, we called it and it was kind of predictable. That being said, Seoul looked really good
against the other teams.
Games, which was just Fusion. They played Fusion twice. They played Shanghai twice.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I'm sure if they had played Charge, they would have flattened Charge into the dirt.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, you got second, but I mean, you won the kickoff clash. So, I mean, it's like you can't, you're trading it. So, it's. I mean, in Shanghai and Seoul are so far ahead of the rest of APAC. I'm pretty sure the only two teams with positive map differential, and it's like plus 24 and plus 23. And the next closest, I think, is still Spark with like -3.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Seoul and Shanghai are just miles above anyone
they
else.
They are so far ahead.
In terms of like
everything.
Map differential and wins and stuff like that. But I think going forward, there's a chance that Fusion can put themselves in position to, by the time playoffs come around, be at the same level of gameplay as Seoul and Shanghai. Even if they aren't as high in the standings or anything, I think they have a chance to go as far as any other APAC team in the playoffs. That's my crazy prediction for the playoffs.
I think that's a valid point. Fusion being like a third place horse. So we move back over to NA, and I mean, we saw this one coming as well. Unfortunately, this was even more lopsided. I mean, we predicted our NA bracket. Okay, to be fair, we were on the Houston Goop, but we didn't think that Houston was going to boom out. But what was funny is even though we had Houston going to the finals, we still had them getting 4-0 stomped. Yeah, because we both universally agreed that it really didn't matter who played Fuel. Fuel was just going to curb. We're just going to roll anybody. Didn't matter who it was.
Yeah, and I think that was going to happen all along, and everyone kind of knew that. Did we seriously have the Defiant going?
We had Defiant getting rolled out, yeah, because no. We had him losing to Houston. Because we thought that it was going to go the same way as the other two tournaments, that Defiant was just gonna lose to Spitfire and then get knocked out by the Outlaws like they had the last two times.
No, we had them beating Spitfire.
Oh, right, we did.
That was terrible.
Well, I mean...
Oh, well, it happens.
Anyway, at the end of the day, we went into that bracket going, it really doesn't matter how we get to the end. Fuel's going to win 4-0.
Yeah, Fuel's going to win, and they did. And it wasn't close.
And what it came down to in the shot game was Fuel... Because, like, Shock's way of playing this whole season has just been proper go kill.
Yeah.
And Fuel just kind of went, okay, proper can go kill. We're just going to kill the rest of your team. And, like, proper still had crazy stats. He had, like, he almost had the most final blows in the whole lobby. Like, his stats are still incredible, but Fuel just kind of ignored it. It's like how you would play goats against Farah. Just ignore the Farah and kill their team.
Yeah.
So Proper could do whatever he wanted, and Fuel just didn't care. They would just kill the rest of the team. And I do think a large portion of the tournament, Kilo didn't really show up a whole lot. I mean, even in the games where they won, I would say that he was the second best hit scan in most of those matches.
Yeah. And the thing about the Shock is, like, it's like their whole team is pretty dang good, especially if they're on fire. They're all like super solid. They're all, top 5 in their roles, I would say, every single player on the Shock.
Mm-hmm.
And then Proper is like number 1 overall. But it's like if they don't show up, Proper alone can't carry them, mm-hmm. and they have that team mentality. And so it'll be interesting going forward, because like if they get in a meta that gives Proper the opportunity to just go crazy on Tracer, and like one dynamic about with this team comp is because it's so team fight based, where you have everyone clumping together, using these high powered support ults and abilities to kind of keep the team alive.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it so you can't have a single person carry nearly as well as you can in, the previous metas we've had this year, where it's a lot of, Tracer knocking out the entire team, or Genji Blade actually doing something besides getting the Lucio to ult. And so
yeah,
it'll be interesting. But it was tragic to watch them lose so hard against Dallas,
I'm
especially
at the very
2
least.
times in a row.
It's actually 3 times because they played literally
Oh,
the
yeah,
week
3
before.
times.
The good thing though is at least it was consistent. I like APAC and NA were at least consistent. Where
Yeah.
it's like Dallas and Shanghai rolled Dynasty and Shock in the final week of the regular of the qualifiers, and then we came into the tournament and they just did the same thing again. So there
Yeah.
wasn't like any weird like things that happened in the midseason madness where teams that had been beating each other before suddenly it flipped. No, this one came in, it was just business as usual. Fuel were like, we've beaten you twice before, we're just gonna do it again, and the Dragons did the same to Dynasty.
Yeah.
So
Which I think, which kind of got me thinking, as you were saying that, I was thinking, week 1 of this tournament cycle, you had someone who I won't say his name, but someone tweeted something about this meta being stupid and it's a skillless meta. And it's like, I think a lot of people coming into the whole Junker Queen thing had like a lot of concerns about it. A lot of, week 1, we had a lot of upsets. And some teams that we thought should be good weren't looking good. I think this tournament kind of showed that, yes, this doesn't play out the same way as the other metas, but teams that were good are still good. Players that are good are still good. And like, regardless of meta, like the Gladiators, it was so tragic because I feel like if they had a better attitude coming into this meta, they might not have had to sit out this tournament. And same thing with Atlanta Reign. I feel like those 2 teams are the only 2 outliers that just like lived outside of, and part of that, the Glads did have a lot of really hard matchups, which sucked for this tournament cycle, but the next leading up to playoffs, they should have pretty easy road, and I think they're already pretty much guaranteed their spot anyway. But I think it just kind of shows that sometimes it's okay to not know everything about something, and sometimes it's okay to just see how it goes. And some people need to stop freaking out. And which relates to something that I know we probably aren't going to go down too deep right now, but Overwatch 2 is going to be awesome. And even if it's not what you expect, just have faith in it. I think a lot of people right now are freaking out about a lot of things, and I think people need to chill, because like, just like this meta, people freaked out and they were like, oh, good teams can't even play this meta because it's just a luck meta. And it's like, no, teams are teams were able to be consistent in this meta. If you figure out the meta, if you take the time to like try to figure out what is intended with it, like, you can make it work and make it look good. And so yeah, everyone needs to stop freaking out about everything.
Yeah, the only thing about it was it was pretty predictable. The really good teams were really good the entire stage. Unlike in the other metas where we kind of went into the tournaments going like, okay, well, Shock look like they're really good, and you're like, well, Shock might win this, but Glads could win this. But we came into this tournament going, no, Fuel and Dragons are winning this, no stop, full stop. Like, there's no one that's going to be able to challenge them, and it was proven right. It really, how the tournament played out before the finals didn't matter. It didn't matter who Dragons or Fuel played in the finals. That other team was just going. They didn't have a chance. And when Fuel and Dragons just roll the next best team in their region in the tournament, then you're like, okay, these are clearly the 2 best teams currently in this meta. And it's like we're back in 2021. Nature is healing. Fuel and Dragons are back on top.
That being said, we say that it was all fine and dandy. Washington almost changed everything.
Yeah,
like, if Washington had won, this whole discussion would be different.
Yeah, because I've got the bracket up here. Justice beat Fuel, and then suddenly Fuel are playing Defiant in the losers bracket, and Defiant, the home crowd, probably goes out instantly.
Yeah,
2 and out, and then Defiant are gone, and then we have literally probably
Washington, London, and the winner of that playing San Francisco, and one of those 2 teams making it to the finals.
Probably not.
I'm saying between San Francisco and whoever.
Yeah, like it would have.
And so it probably still would have been San Francisco.
Yeah, had Justice beaten Fuel, Shock probably would have entered the grand finals from the upper bracket. Because there's no way that Justice or Spitfire would have been able to do anything to Shock. Because
I don't know if Washington got the momentum of beating Dallas and then they went on and beat London, I think they could have beat Shock.
Well, no, because had Justice 3-0'd Fuel, it would have been because Fuel just kept playing the Ash, right? Because as soon as Fuel swapped over to just mirroring the Sojourn, they just rolled Spitfire back 3 in a row. And so I don't think that they would have been able to take down Spitfire and Shock back to back because neither of those teams played Ash really at all. They aren't Ash teams. Justice just kind of had the upper hand, and Decay was able to do a lot more aggro on the Sojourn. So even if they had beaten Spitfire, Shock still would have just beat him into the dirt. I mean, this is the Justice that literally got 3-0'd by the Outlaws the week before this tournament.
Yeah, but I mean,
Shock would have entered to the upper bracket. Like we still would have had the same finals, but the losers bracket would have been interesting because Fuel definitely would have knocked Defiant out, round 1. I don't think that even this Defiant that kind of leveled up in the losers bracket, I don't think they would have been able to beat Fuel. And then we would have had like the most high stakes Battle of Texas that has ever happened. And honestly, I feel like Outlaws probably would have come into that game and actually showed up had it been a battle for Texas. Because there would have been a lot more stakes than just tournament. This would have been like one of the few actual rivalries that still exist in this league that aren't just manufactured. Like this is Outlaws Fuel is a genuine rivalry. And had Fuel been in the losers bracket and played Outlaws in the quarterfinals down there, that actually could have been a really good match.
Yeah.
Fuel probably still would have won. And then Fuel would have just rolled Mayhem and would have just rolled Spitfire or Justice. Like, we would have ended up with the same outcome, except Fuel would have just rampaged through the lower bracket. It would have been really entertaining to watch the upper bracket be a weird mess of teams just waiting to lose to Shock, But overall, like, other than that game, every other game pretty much up until like Mayhem started beating teams, because I didn't think they were going to beat Spitfire. There's no way.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, it was like, didn't matter how we got there. The grand finals were going to probably be 4-0 Fuel.
Yeah. They
and this is the only tournament where we came into the tournament going, no, Fuel's definitely going to win this 4-0 4-1. All the other ones, we were like, it could be Shock, it could be Glads,
Which brings me to my other big picture analysis bragging moment. So coming into this third tournament, we had a segment in our last episode leading up to it where we talked about who we thought could be better than expected. And I said Fuel. I thought Fuel would kind of come late.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you thought that Fuel were going to just crash and burn.
I said that they had the highest. There was a likelihood that they could. I think that I had flipped to say that it could go either way.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we both kind of settled on. But looking back, big brain, bread and rice over here. Oh yeah, I not to say I can see the future or anything, but London finals. Not to say I can see the future, but
I mean, Spitfire would have to run through the 8-pack teams as well.
Do you know what would have to happen? Like, one simple thing. You have a Ryan May meta.
Actually, yeah, that would have to be what it is.
And on top of that, multiple players, like, I don't know, get sick right in time for playoffs. Like, Proper and
Honda just catch
his wrist is just sore. So it's not a real injury, but it keeps him from gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that, like, him, Hanbin, yeah. And then
you literally need every superstar in the league to just not show up in the playoffs.
And London makes it to the finals. Hey, I didn't say London wins the finals.
So every team except one has to have their superstar players just not show up.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And if it's a Rhine meta, there are only
no.
So if it's a Rhine meta, like Glads can beat them, I think. I think in a good day, Dallas might be able to. San Francisco Shock should beat them.
Dynasty and Dragons could potentially both beat them.
So that's 5 teams. That's easy.
That's half of the tournament bracket.
Yeah, so you have 5 players.
They'd have to get sick.
Oh, yeah, man. Like easy London finals.
All right, we're hearing it here first. But before we run into power rankings, any final thoughts about this bracket, about how the tournament went, how this meta rolled out?
I think it was fun. It was a fun one. I enjoyed the Junker Queen. It kind of, it wasn't like goats, but it had certain things that were like goats. And so for me, it was it brought back some good memories of like trying to figure out what crazy overhealth stuff was going on from each player, where cooldowns were. I think visually, one thing that I wish that they implemented for metas like this is if they showed the cooldowns for like Junker Queens, commanding shout or whatever it's called. I think stuff like that would help. But I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was a good meta. I thought it was a good tournament cycle. I'm excited to see what kind of patch notes they have and how they're going to adjust things. And I really like they've confirmed they are, right?
Yeah, they have said that they are adjusting Junker Queen.
Do we know if teams have started playing with new patch at all?
I saw a video on Twitter of the Fuel like gathering around Hanbin as they were reading the patch notes, and I know that there were leaked patch notes, but they haven't been confirmed or not, so we'll discuss that next week. Okay. But no, teams do already know of the patch changes and are already practicing on new stuff.
They're already practicing on the Rhine May.
The Rhine May comp, the Spitfire comp, correct. For me, this tournament, I'm glad that we only have one stage of this. I think it was like cool to have, and this stage really, it's like even if you make like one error, the map's over almost. It's like if you make one mistake, the fight is just it's lost. Unless you're like the Dallas Fuel and clutching out things you have no right clutching out. You make one mistake and it's like not all trades are equal. If your Junker Queen goes down and you kill the enemy team Sojourn, no, you still lose the fight because not having the Junker Queen there, that's just a death sentence. So it was really interesting to see the difference between like teams going aggressive, because it was really hard to play defensively on this one, and we saw the Outlaws just get manhandled when they tried to do that. Like this was really like there really wasn't a reactive way of playing this comp. You just had to go pedal to the metal and just put your foot on the throat of the enemy team. Otherwise, you were going to get rolled instead.
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, it was a fun tournament as well. Not having Glads and Rain in there really made it more interesting, even though we already basically knew the winner coming into it. The path that we took to get there was more enjoyable.
Yeah, I think one other thought, there was a big thought I had. Oh yeah, I was going to say one of the weird things about this meta is it's like characters could survive so long. Like different players could survive so long, but then in an instant just be gone. Like it was a high healing, high burst meta, and so like things happen just so fast. And so it was like you would look at someone and they would have like legit 400 health, 200 plus like 200 bonus health, and then just bam, gone, dead. And it was crazy to watch. And so I think I'm excited to see what the patch notes. I hope it's enough to, cut her down. And I think one advantage of them, like the pros already having the patch, while, before it's announced at all, is if there are adjustments that need to be made before the pros start playing, actual matches, like that can happen. Like I think if Junker Queen is still like the only tank being played right now, they probably add in more adjustments. Before. Yeah, at least I hope so.
Like, I would hope so as well.
And I'm fine if Junker Queen gets some play, but when you're playing a character like Junker Queen on maps like Gibraltar, there's a problem there. Like I'm fine, seeing Junker Queen on half the maps or something like that. But when you're running Junker Queen every single map without fail, regardless of anything else, like I think that's an issue. And it would also be nice if we had a break from Sojourn, because I love Sojourn, but the fact that she can just kill people out of nowhere, like it makes the game. I don't know. I don't love watching Sojourn every game. Like it's good to see her occasionally because like people can pop off, but it's also like really frustrating to watch when you're like, oh, these teams are doing all these small little things and it's really cool, and then she accidentally headshot someone and
through a wrecking ball,
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I don't know.
No, that's fair, but I think it was good for us to have this meta.
Yeah,
lots of people don't like it, but I think it was good for us to have a meta like this going into, then we can even more appreciate whatever Countdown Cup has, because if we didn't have this meta come through, then I feel like it was good for the game balance to have a meta where things were just overtuned.
Yeah, definitely.
So enough of that. Power rankings, here we go. So we have a decision to make, just like we had the last two tournaments.
No.
What do we want? Are we wanting to rank for the future, even though we don't know what the future is, or do we want to rank tournament solely and then use next week? Maybe we get information about metas, comps that are being run, and do power rankings next week in prep.
So what I say we do, just for the fun of it, is because I saw into the future and saw...
You saw the meta, the Rhine meta.
I saw the Rhine meta. Let's pred as if it's a Rhine meta. And then next week, when we have more information, we can adjust.
So we're not even going to do a power ranking based on the tournament.
No. I mean, tournament's old news. Junker Queen's dead.
What is this?
Yeah.
So basically, this is going to be a clickbait power rankings.
Yeah, I mean, we have to do something.
All right, so everybody watching this video, understand that these power rankings are meaningless, and you can skip through this right to play of the week. You don't have to pay attention to these. This is just us messing around.
Ignore Hiccup. This is the most important thing we have ever done. If you want to see into the future, listen to these power rankings. Although they won't be perfect, because Spitfire's going to win the finals. And
my goodness.
So Spitfire should be number 1 or number 2, but we aren't going to do that because...
Are we genuine? Are you being serious here? You're wanting to do a
Rhine?
Okay.
Why not?
Hypothetically, we'll say the meta is Rhine, May,
Lucio
with an Ana, and then hit scan is either Sojourn, Ass, Soldier, any hit scan really. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, that being said, Gladiators literally won the kickoff clash playing that comp.
Yeah.
So, Gladiators would have to be 1.
They're number 1.
But see, Fuel, I feel like even if Ryan is meta, there's going to be the counter to it.
Yeah.
And Fuel got second place in the kickoff clash playing the counter to it.
I think going forward, because they won't want to river all the way back, and so what I see being the best counter into Rhine in this next patch, you're going to think I'm crazy.
You're going to say like Orisa or something, aren't you?
But it is going to be Orisa, because if you look at like early pro, when they first got their hands on Overwatch 2, word got out that Rhine comps were being played early. It was a lot of Reaper May. And then Orisa killed that. And then they moved into, what we ended up seeing.
Winston, Zaryas.
And stuff. Like, Winston started getting play, and it became that whole comp. So, Orisa could be...
Yeah, but we didn't see Orisa used in Kickoff Clash, though, was the thing. Like, used as the counter. So, like...
But I think if they end up
if we go into a Rhine meta, I really see things being largely similar to Kickoff Clash. It's just Rhine is run all the time instead of like Winston comps, because it really seemed like Kickoff Clash, like the BL end all was if you were really good at the Rhine comp, you just beat everybody else. Because it was like if you weren't super good at the Rhine comp, you were countered by Doomfist. Is how we saw Outlaws and Rain doing it. Was that they were able to pull out the Doomfist, but then like the Doomfist comp was countered by the Winston comp, but then the Winston comp was countered by the Zarya comp, which was countered by it was like a circle.
Man, stage 1 was so awesome.
So I think we're really is like how similar to the Kickoff Clash are we thinking this meta is going to be? Like, is Doomfist going to be viable? Is Winston going to be viable, or is it like hard Rhine and like Junker Queen?
Let's balance it. I mean, let's rate it as if it's pure Rhine.
Even on Gibraltar, we're just hard locking Rhine.
Gibraltar is weird. Teams pull out Hog.
You're going on the Gunba Goop week 1, the Hog meta. Okay, so let's just assume it's similar to Kickoff Clash, except now we have Junker Queen thrown in the mix, because I feel like Junker Queen would kind of counter the Rhine comp, because we saw Spitfire try and use it, and it didn't usually work.
You know, if Junker Queen doesn't get nerfed down...
She'll get nerfed.
Yeah, but like, as is, you can't play Rhine into her.
No, but even if she is nerfed, I think that like fundamentally the Rhine comp doesn't work against the Junker Queen, because you're able to use the speed boost to kind of circumvent the walls a little bit and get the extra health. So I would imagine that the comps would come down to basically everything in Kickoff Clash plus Junker Queen. But I feel like if she's nerfed enough, then you'll see Zarya creep back in like the Fuel did. So I don't really think, like, I genuinely, if we do a Rhine meta, I feel like the power rankings would just be like they were for Kickoff Clash, except Spitfire would be higher.
Has nothing changed since Kickoff Clash?
Not really, because I mean, when we went into in Summer Showdown, Sojourn was buffed a little, and we saw a lot of like Ball, and we saw a lot of Winston, and we saw a little bit of Ryan. Like Summer Showdown, I mean, Midseason Madness and Kickoff Clash were somewhat similar, although they made some changes which made Zarya not as viable, but like Doomfist was still being run all the time. I mean, not a whole lot has changed other than Junker Queen being added to the game, and I don't know what that, depending on how much she's nerfed, would determine how much she just crushes the Rhine comp, or at least gives it an adequate counter. And then I just don't, it's kind of like odd. It's because it's, I don't know to what extent, because you'd have to buff like the Rhine comp a lot for it to be hard meta, because even in Kickoff Clash, it wasn't hard meta. It was just a good counter against the Zarya comp.
Well, and so if we're being realistic here, which the original idea wasn't to be realistic, it was just to be
crazy. Okay, no, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to assume every team is able to play their best comp. How about we do that?
Okay, every team playing their best comp.
So I think Gladiators, I think, is still top. Well, okay. Peak Gladiators in what? Kickoff Clash is probably peak Gladiators, right? How does Kickoff Clash Gladiators compare to Summer Showdown Fuel?
I think Glads win that.
I think Glads take it. And then Shock, they looked best when they were...
I think Shock beat Fuel as well.
Really? I mean, Fuel stomped over Shock, though, in the Kickoff Clash and in Summer Showdown. On two different, very different comps.
But I think neither of those was Shock at their best.
Well, but I mean, has Shock played at their best in playoffs? No.
Well, in playoffs, no.
Yeah, but I mean, in regular season, I think you still keep. I think you still keep Fuel second. If Fuel are able to play their best comps into their strengths, Fuel are better than Shock, because Fuel have the hive mind that allows them to just circumvent Shock proper, go kill everything. Because it seems like at the end of the day, that's what Shock defaults to, is proper go kill everything. So I think you go Glads, Fuel, Shock. Now you get this weird middle tier. So like Outlaw's best comp is definitely the Doomfist comp, right? I mean, you could say it's the Junker Queen, but they like stumbled and keeled over twice.
Yeah, and well, I think no matter what, I don't think you can put Outlaws next. I don't think
you can. I think you put Rain fourth.
I think
because Rain's best comp was definitely the Summer Showdown stuff with Doomfist, and they just killed everyone.
Their Doomfist looked way better than the Outlaws. It wasn't countered nearly as hard.
Yeah, no. I think there's still a tier break between Shock and Rain, though.
Yeah, and I think after Rain, I would have to go Spitfire.
Well, Spitfire's desk comp, would you say Junker Queen or would you say the Rhine comp, the Rhine May stuff? Because
I'd say the Rhine May.
Because if it's Rhine May, Outlaws beat Spitfire when they did the Doomfist versus the Rhine May. Because Doomfist, when played properly, counters the Rhine May. Unless you're playing like Gladiators, in which case it doesn't matter what you play, you lose. But Spitfire beat Rain in the match.
Yeah, that's the thing. So do we rate, team versus team, or do we rate them overall? Because I think overall Spitfire would beat more teams than Outlaws would beat.
I mean, Outlaws have the better record if we're going based off of just overall.
Yeah, but a lot of that Spitfire haven't been able to play, their best.
Yeah, because they've just been counter comps. Well, and that's the thing. Yeah. It's like Rain and Outlaws' best comp is a little bit of a counter comp to Spitfire's best comp. And I mean, Glad's, Fuel, and Shock, their comps are all definitely counter comps to Spitfire's. I mean, regardless, Spitfire definitely above Justice, Titans, and Mayhem. Like that's no question. Yeah. So it's like when Spitfire and Rain play each other, Spitfire usually take that setup. But when the Outlaws played the Spitfire in the best comp matchup, Spitfire lost.
Yeah, and so I think those three just have to be kind of in their
own tier. They just kind of beat each other.
You can put Outlaws above Spitfire. I'll put Spitfire.
Well, and I would put Spitfire above Rain, but then Outlaws are lower than Rain. But it's like these three are like.
Yeah, I think they're just like this.
Do you think there would be a tier break though between Spitfire and Defiant if everyone's playing their best comps? Because Defiant would definitely be the Junker Queen comp.
Yeah, I still don't think Defiant are at the same level because it's like, Defiant when they're playing their best comp in the best state of mind
with the home crowd.
With the home crowd, they can beat those teams.
But that's not what
we aren't saying each team at their ideal
location. No, it's just at their best.
Like, at their best comp,
Defiant.
And I think Toronto they aren't consistent enough, even when the meta's in their favor.
So we think tier break beneath Spitfire. Okay.
And I think the big thing with the tier break, like I think it all comes down to consistency.
Well, I mean, the Outlaws haven't been very consistent. Well, okay.
They've been more
consistent than Defiant. Yeah.
They haven't been consistent in tournament.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then we have this middle group then: Defiant, Justice, Titans, Mayhem. I think Defiant are at the top of that list. I think you can put them there. But then the question is, who comes next in that bracket? Because Justice, their best comp, I don't know. Because
without Happy.
Yeah, exactly. That does change things because now they can't even play their best comps because now Decay.
They looked their best when Happy was in and playing out of his mind, and without that, they're definitely below Defiant. Are they?
And Titans beat them in their Titans beat them in their regular season matchup, and Mayhem's best comp was definitely Kickoff Clash when someone was able to play the Winston.
Yeah,
but they popped off in Summer Showdown, but I wouldn't say that comp was their best.
No, I think they definitely looked better compared to everyone else.
So I'd put Mayhem right behind Defiant then.
Yeah.
And then I think Titans at their best, which is definitely the Junker Queen comp, I think beat Justice because they did when they matched up because Justice's best look with this roster, you can only say it's the Junker Queen comp and Titans beat them.
What would be their ideal comp? Like if you were to make a comp around the Justice, what would it be?
It would definitely be, you'd have to have a Genji in there because that's Assassin's a flex DPS. So it would either be, it would be like a Tracer Genji because then you put Decay on the Tracer, but Kalios isn't a main tank player. So you can't really, unless you're doing dive with a D.Va, but D.Va comps have never been good.
But if they were, because we're saying hypothetically, if there was,
hypothetically, it would be that, or maybe a Zarya comp, because Decay is good on hit scan. So I would say it's probably just the Junker Queen comp, because I don't think that Justice, because the Zarya comp was hit scan Reaper, And I would definitely say that Decay's Sojourn is probably better than his Reaper. Because like it was Reaper hit scan was how you played with the Zarya. And you want to put Assassin on Reaper? No, his best character is definitely Genji. So it's definitely got to be the Junker Queen. And when you compare that to the Titans, who's, 3 wins versus 0, Titans' best comp is also the Junker Queen, and they beat Justice when they played. So I think you put Titans above Justice, but then you've got this Boston Uprising argument down here at the bottom. And when Boston played Titans, Boston won.
Yeah, I would still put Justice above Titans because I think once again it comes down to consistency. Titans, I feel like I just can't trust them to be
not yet. Yeah, they need some
above,
good. They need good wins.
They just I'll put them in the same tier as Justice, Mayhem, Defiant, but they haven't beat anyone good. Like
they've beaten the worst teams in the league.
Yeah.
So then
and they've beaten the least consistent teams in the league. So even when they get wins that like when they beat the Justice, it's like
they lose to Boston
awesome,
the following week.
Justice, but are the Justice even good? Like it depends on the week.
So then what do we want to do about Boston Uprising? Because Boston,
Boston's got so many players.
If Boston's best look is when they're playing their Western guys, when Punk and Crimzo are in the lineup, like their best look was literally when they played Titans on the Junker Queen and won.
Yeah.
Because before that, they were doing funky stuff. I mean, Punk's Doomfist looks good as well. I would honestly put Boston above Titans because Boston just when they are actually playing their real roster, Boston can look competitive almost against anyone.
Yeah.
So I feel like at that point, we almost might have to drop Titans into the lower, either drop them lower or put Boston in the tier with Justice above Titans.
Yeah, I'd be okay putting Titans down.
Moving Titans down beneath Boston.
I don't think Boston belongs up there. And I think like Titans being up there is a stretch, especially because.
And then obviously New York and Paris. Now, is there a tier break between Titans and New York?
Well, the question is
there
a meta that New York looks good on?
No, because they've done it every meta where they have like 1 week where it's like, oh wait, hang on, they're cooking something, and then they just fall flat.
Here, and then
I think their best meta is when Yaki's able to play Genji, but even then they just get rolled by the Titans. So I don't think that New York has ever been consistent enough to like do anything. I don't think that there is a meta where they can be super competitive with everybody because they just kind of like spark upon genius for 2 games a stage.
And I think Paris is in the same boat, except less flashes of genius.
Well, we're out of tier breaks to put, so we can't put a tier break between New York and Paris.
No, they're in the same.
So New York so this off the goop out of left field NA power rankings has 4 tier breaks. With Glad's Fuel Shock, tier break, Rain, Outlaws Spitfire, tier break, Defiant Mayhem Justice, tier break, Uprising and Titans in their own tier break, Excelsior Eternal.
And I think, honestly, if we look at the season as a whole...
This is actually almost...
This is perfectly accurate. Like, in terms of, like, overall...
Who's really competing with who? Yeah, I think the only argument you could make is putting Defiant with Rain, Outlaws, and Spitfire. Because Defiant are competing with those 3 teams for those.
But I think it depends on the meta, though,
and like the level that they show up.
Yeah,
I don't trust Defiant as much as I trust Rain, Spitfire, Outlaws in the regular season at least.
Yeah, and I feel like Toronto at their best is competitive with those teams at their just average.
Average, because if Outlaws had shown up in the tournament, they would have beaten Defiant, and Spitfire did beat Defiant. So that's how it is. So moving over to APAC, I think all you do is put Fusion above Charge and ta-da, we're done. Well, okay. I get you. I mean, you keep the tier break between Dragons and Dynasty. I feel like you have to. And Fusion, Charge, Hunters in that order, I think is appropriate, right? The question is, what do we do with the Spark team? Because Spark's best meta was definitely Summer Showdown. I mean, mid-season madness. I mean, they only lost to Fusion in terms of the APAC teams, but then Summer Showdown, they just fell flat on their face. So if we're going purely mid-season madness, I feel like you put them below Fusion because that was how they performed. Right?
Yeah, I think that's...
And then you do sense. Charge, Hunters, Valiant. APAC didn't really change a lot. We just moved Fusion and Spark. Wow, we talk about how confusing APAC is, and then we go and do like this weird, wonky power rankings, and nothing really changes.
Well, because it's like they're consistent in their inconsistencies. It's like Fusion will lose games against
Valiant
lower teams. Yeah. And stuff like that. So it's like weird stuff happens, but you can kind of count on it happening. And it's like when it comes down to the tournaments and stuff, like some teams are competitive, some teams aren't. Valiant aren't going to make playoffs.
No.
Like that's just...
Doesn't matter the meta, doesn't matter what Valiant they can play. No.
Could take a game off Spark. Wouldn't surprise me. Like it would be weird, but stuff like that happens in APAC. So it's like it's weird, but it's also not. Like it's predictable in its weirdness. Like
yeah.
And none of the weirdness actually changes like the weirdness usually doesn't have like a big effect on
it levels itself out and makes sense in the end. So these are the weird power rankings that have no bearing on anything whatsoever and will be fixed next week after we get information about the meta. But because we have no meta information, we're purely speculating. This is not going to be how things... I mean, maybe it will, but...
I mean, the big difference between this and how things will end is Spitfire.
Where does Spitfire go and where does Defiant go? I think
Spitfire in the finals, easy. It's going to be Spitfire against the Spark. I'm just kidding.
Spitfire Charge. Here we go.
Oh, yeah. Easy.
All right. Well, to end off, as always, play of the week. I think that there's only one play that is a perfect microcosm of what took place in this bracket. It's the Hanbin play against the San Francisco Shock. When literally Fuel have 2 people alive, Hanbin comes in and solo rampages 4 of Shock, and then Fuel just win. They kept doing this over and over again. The Fuel and even the Dragons just kept getting away with it. They would just throw ults in, and they'd be like, "No, we win these now," and they would just win. No other teams were able to do that. Pelican tried it so many times, and it never worked. Even the Shock tried it. Proper would try and win a clutch of fight, but Hanbin's just a freak of nature.
Yeah, and it was crazy to watch. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the tank meta, and we'll see if Hanbin actually exists after this week.
I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out next week. So that was a Summer Showdown and some weird power rankings that actually had nothing to do with the Summer Showdown. But there are no matches this week, so next week when we come in, there's a lot of news that took place with some roster moves and some Overwatch 2 information, but because we didn't want it wasn't related to the tournament, we're holding those for next week. So next week will be news that happened, any meta information we get, and obviously, as always, predding all, 13 North American games that happen week 1, like we always do, as we approach into the final quarter of the season.
Final quarter.
Oh, no. Well, we hope you all enjoyed the tournament just as much as we did, and we hope you enjoy the week off, and then look forward to the matches next week. We'll see you.